From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. In the United States, in sunny California, 80 kilometers south of San Francisco, you'll find Silicon Valley, home to Apple, Google, Meta, and hundreds of other big tech to small tech startups. It attracts people with radical ideas to work on some of the most lucrative frontiers: artificial intelligence, social media, crypto. And it's predominantly liberal. California is solidly Democrat in state and national elections, and it leans left on issues like climate change, health, immigration, LGBT rights. So how do you explain this?
On startups and technology, we are certainly among the best experts in the world. We think Donald Trump is a better choice than Joe Biden on these issues.
I think we're in massive trouble, frankly, with the Kamala administration, and that's my honest opinion. And I think really it's essential that you win for the good of the country for this election.
A thick slice of the top of Silicon Valley is leaning Trump, led by tech bro-in-chief Elon Musk. How did that happen? And could it affect the presidential election in November?
You know, if you have the richest man on the planet, i.e. Elon Musk, in your corner, giving you tens of millions or hundreds of millions over the course of a campaign, that is potentially a difference maker, and that's what we're going to see come November 5th.
The story today: why tech bros are backing Trump.
I'm Danny Fortson, the West Coast correspondent for The Sunday Times.
Can you take us back, Danny, to an event a few weeks ago now? It was in Nashville, Tennessee, and there was a large crowd cheering quite an unlikely guest at a Bitcoin conference.
That's right. Donald Trump, of all people.
Hello, Bitcoiners. Thank you very much. Hello. It's good to be with you. It's good to be with you.
He was the keynote speaker, and he made all kinds of promises about what he was going to do for the crypto industry, for Bitcoin in particular. And on stage, he said that the United States will become the, quote, crypto capital of the planet and the Bitcoin superpower of the world.
If crypto is going to define the future, I want to be mined, minted, and made in the USA. It's going to be. It's not going to be made anywhere else.
He's also referred to himself as the crypto president, which of course is all very interesting given that just a few years ago, he was saying that he was, quote, not a fan, and that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies were actually not money, and that their value was based on thin air. So quite the reversal.
Very pro-money, we know that. Why not crypto money?
Exactly right. You know, his presence there was both surprising and totally unsurprising, because if we have seen anything from Donald Trump over this last decade or so, is that he is very transactional. And what's really interesting about crypto, along with tech, is that it has grown up. There's a lot more money around. There's a recent report that they've already invested about $120 million into this election cycle, which makes the crypto industry, these are the big companies, the big investors, one of the largest kind of groups of corporate donors in this election cycle. That gives you a sense of why all of a sudden he might be very interested in cozying up to them.
And not just cozying up to them, his presidential campaign has actually been flogging crypto items, hasn't it? They've been selling digital trading cards with his image on, is that right?
That is right. They're $100 each, and if you get 4 of them, you also, I think, you get a free pair of golden shoes that are also Trump shoes. So it feels like quite a good deal. I mean, it's another way to make money, right? He's leaning into that, and it appears that people are investing, and it's, you know, another new business line for the former president.
So that endorsement from him for crypto, and I guess in some parts crypto for him, happened. But thinking about Silicon Valley a bit more broadly, in the sort of recent past, how would you characterize Silicon Valley's politics, if we can generalize it?
Wildly progressive. So if you just step back and look at where we are, kind of San Francisco Bay, which is where a lot of these big tech companies are based. It has long been seen as kind of this bastion of progressive politics, of progressive policies. And that is really reflected in the workforces of the big tech companies. There's been a lot of research into kind of the voting tendencies of the rank and file, so to speak, of little tech and big tech. And it is pretty dramatically skewed toward Democrat, toward the left. And that is the way it has been in recent years and really going back decades.
And there was a time, wasn't there, where the sort of higher echelons of these bigger companies were quite cozy with, especially thinking of like President Obama's administration. I mean, even sort of a load of Obama staffers went to go and work there afterwards, didn't they?
Yeah, there's a bit of a revolving door. You look at the higher echelons of places like Meta, formerly known as Facebook, Google, Uber, a lot of the kind of the top policy people, the top comms people, you look at their resumes and their previous stop was the White House or, the speaker's office or various places pretty high up in the Washington kind of political machine.
So what did they make of Donald Trump then when he arrived firmly on the political scene in the build-up to the 2016 presidential election?
Yeah, so when he arrived, like a lot of places that are heavily Democrat, it was a mix of horror and awe that this figure had appeared and he seemed to be doing quite well. But one thing is very clear is that, if you were a supporter of Donald Trump in Silicon Valley, in the tech industry, you didn't talk about it. Kind of almost like a scarlet letter that you would have to wear if you came out and said, I support Donald Trump, here is why, I think he's great. You would be very much seen as an outsider and someone not to be disinvited from the dinner party if you were a techie who supported Trump.
And so in 2016, he famously won, of course, and in 2020, he famously lost. And in the new year of 2021, in the build-up to President Biden's inauguration, of course, we had the now infamous Capitol storming and riots. A lot of tech companies at the time, they rushed to distance themselves from him. Is that fair to say at that time?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, not just tech companies, virtually every company. I mean, There was that period right after that terrible event where everyone under the sun, including the entire Republican establishment, effectively disowned Trump and his role in that whole affair.
And he was chucked off some of the social media platforms.
Indeed, off of Facebook, off of Twitter. And that was a really big moment. And that, in a way, if you look back at it now, where things are now in 2024, that was kind of a pivotal moment because that was these companies that, especially on the conservative side of the political aisle, they see them as these left-wing progressive companies who are pushing their agenda, who are silencing conservative voices. And here you have Donald Trump, who had, I think at the time, something like 90 million Twitter followers, millions and millions of followers on Facebook, being kicked off. They took that almost as a cause célèbre of, look at these companies, they're out of control. They're being directed by ideology, and it is a dangerous ideology. It is anti-free speech, it's anti-freedom. We need to support our guy, Donald Trump.
When do you think we started to see this cooling off between Silicon Valley, the top of Silicon Valley, and Democrats, people like Joe Biden, and them warming a bit more to Donald Trump?
I think COVID.
COVID?
For a few different reasons. One, there was a huge debate, obviously, in the UK and certainly out here in California and around the United States around the lockdowns, around whether they were scientifically proven to be a good idea, whether we should be doing this as public policy. And that led to huge fights, again, on social media platforms. And this idea of platforms saying, well, this is misinformation. And then, of course, some of that misinformation turned out to be, well, actually, some of it was accurate. But at the time, people thought it was misinformation and they made these judgment calls, et cetera. So it became very fraught. And again, Donald Trump was right in the center of this whole kind of storm. And he was espousing views in those early days of the pandemic that seemed, some of them were truly out there.
Right. And then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute. 1 minute, And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number on the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that.
But again, it was kind of lumped into this whole culture war that kind of broke out over what was information, what we should be talking about, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, and people were very scared. People were dying. Kids were stuck at home. It was just a very, very messy time. And in the middle of it were the social media companies, in particular, these platforms, because they're the way, especially when we're all stuck at home, where we were all talking about this, where we were all arguing about it. And so this light was really shown in a pretty harsh way on these tech platforms and how they were making these decisions.
And Donald Trump was someone capitalizing on that.
Absolutely. And then, of course, he got kicked off. And so that was for those who were already clear that these companies were not responsible actors. This was the ultimate proof, right? That this was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. You're kicking off a president of the United States from these platforms, not allowing him to share his views, share his voice with his tens of millions of followers.
Is it the case then, as we move closer and closer to the present day, that actually it wasn't necessarily that some of these people were growing more and more attracted to Donald Trump, but more their outlooks aligned as some of the heads of Silicon Valley got less progressive, as you described them as earlier, and more libertarian? Did that fold into the Trump way of things more?
Yeah, no, there's always been a real strong libertarian streak out here because, the people who are attracted to the tech industry, Silicon Valley in particular, the whole kind of ethos is around disruption, is around looking at a big institution or a big company or a big industry and saying, it shouldn't be this way. I'm going to take this whole thing down with this one idea I have, and I'm going to make this improbable reality a reality. And so you already have that kind of default setting for a lot of people, kind of that is anti-institution, anti-powers that be, right? And then again, if you look at the administration from 2020 on under Joe Biden, there's increasing worries about him, about his COVID policies. Critically, he approved a very large stimulus package, basically handing out free checks to everyone during the pandemic to help them get through. And a lot of people said, since this was ruinous for the economy, this is a very bad idea. And then we had this kind of 2 years of very high interest rates to kind of bring inflation down. And so it's been a very painful time. And again, you've seen a lot of people who just said, look, this current administration is not fit to lead the nation. And here we have this other guy who's been yelling from the sidelines, Donald Trump, I can fix this. I can do it better. I am more vital. I am more young. I have better ideas. And you can agree or disagree with that, but it overlapped quite neatly with a lot of people who became extremely frustrated with the economy and a lot of the policies that have been rolled out over these past few years.
And also, was it a time where governments everywhere, and I guess obviously Democrats in the US, were talking a bit more about regulation of these kind of companies? We were getting more and more concerned about the safety of children on these platforms, on how they deal with misinformation. And was that maybe another push factor away from the Democrat fold?
100%. I'll give you just a sense of it. So you have Apple, NVIDIA, Microsoft, Meta. They're all worth more than $1 trillion.
Yes.
And in the case of Apple, $3 trillion. In the case of NVIDIA, about $2 trillion. Those two companies alone are worth more than the entire universe of nearly 2,000 companies listed in London. So that just gives you a sense of this is not this little upstart industry anymore. This is the most powerful industry in the world, and they have endless amounts of money. And so, of course, the regulations are coming. The attitudes toward tech have changed. They've become much more skeptical. We're starting to see a lot more of the kind of the downsides of the technologies that they have rolled out. And of course, so in the midst of this kind of oncoming regulation or fear of oncoming regulation, there's been a lot of pushback against that, against the Biden presidency. And on the other hand, again, you have Donald Trump. He is someone I think a lot of people out here, just from naked self-interest, think they can do business with. He's very transactional. And he pitches himself as a businessman, a very successful businessman. Again, we can argue whether that's true or not, or to what degree it's true or not. But he is seen by a lot of people out here as like, he is not going to throw the book at us in the same way that the threats are coming from the Democratic side.
Danny, we're going through the relationship between Silicon Valley, or at least the sort of top leaders of Silicon Valley, and Donald Trump in particular. And you said previously that in years gone by, if people in Silicon Valley were thinking about this kind of thing, they were doing so quietly at home, muttering it to themselves. And then we had this year, dramatically just after that attempt on Donald Trump's life, when he narrowly avoided an assassin's bullet, we had Elon Musk, chief Silicon Valley bro, definitively coming out and endorsing Trump. What do you make of why that happened and what the impact of it was?
Well, I mean, I don't know Elon Musk, but I've covered him a lot, and I know a lot of people who know him. It seems to me that he has gone through his own kind of pretty dramatic transformation politically. You know, if you go back to 2020, he supported vociferously Andrew Yang, who's a former tech executive whose main platform point was wanting to put everybody on universal basic income so everybody gets a check month in, month out, because we're all going to lose our jobs due to AI. That was his
Wasn't he also big on maths as well, and that being taught more in schools?
Yes.
And he was a big feature of the Democratic sort of presidential nomination a few years ago.
He was, and he caught some people's imagination, but that was Elon Musk's guy 4 years ago. And now you have Donald Trump taking that role for Elon Musk. Donald Trump has become Elon's guy, and Donald Trump is very anti-electric vehicle, anti-climate change policy. And these are causes that are, of course, near and dear, kind of central to Elon Musk's entire empire and entire life's work. And yet he has sided with him because there's a few issues that he is aligned with him on, principally the border and immigration, and Trump's very hard stance around closing the border, building the wall, sending people back. Immigration seems to be the real kind of driver for why Elon Musk has sided with Trump, which again is just really surprising given that all the other positions that Donald Trump has that seem to be in direct opposition to what Elon Musk theoretically wants and is working on.
He also shares his gripe about free speech being eroded, and all of arguably that's why Elon Musk bought Twitter, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And of course, he reinstated Trump on Twitter, and then not too long ago had a 2-hour conversation, kind of interview on Twitter, where they really just lavished each other with praise. It was a real love fest.
During your first term as president, you were attacked relentlessly every day, often very unfairly with false attacks. And you didn't try to shut down the media. You didn't try to inhibit their freedom of speech. And I think that says a lot.
The good thing is that you and I have, and some people, very few, we can get the word out. Although sometimes it's hard because they don't want to print it. Like we're having a great conversation right now. Kamala wouldn't have this conversation. She can't because she's not smart.
A kind of interview is a good way of describing that, yes.
Exactly.
He's also pledged a lot of cash.
The reporting was that he was going to give $45 million a month, which would make him by far the biggest donor of anyone in America. It is unclear. He has since said that's not the case, but he has said he is raising money for Trump and seems to be pretty heavily involved in the campaign financing.
Elon Musk, of course, isn't the only person in Silicon Valley to back Donald Trump. There are many others. One of his biggest supporters is Peter Thiel. Danny, for the uninitiated, who he and why is he in this fold?
So Peter Thiel is a really fascinating character in Silicon Valley. So he's part of the quote-unquote PayPal mafia, who are a group of executives who way back in the day in the 90s founded PayPal, sold it to eBay, and made a bunch of money when they were all in their 20s and set them on their way. But he had gone to Stanford, and even at Stanford, he was always somewhat apart. He started the Stanford Review, which was this student conservative newspaper, again, in a very liberal university. There's a book written on him recently, and they called it The Contrarian, which I think really sums him up. He takes pride and has made his money by making bets on people and ideas that others won't touch or that are seen as heretical or strange or out there. And of course, his most famous bet was he was the first person to write a check to a young Mark Zuckerberg when he was 19.
Ka-ching.
Yes, exactly. He turned that $500,000 into an estimated $400 million. And he's made a bunch of other very big, very successful bets throughout his career here.
And actually, he's backed Trump for a while. He's not a recent public convert.
When we talked a little bit earlier about going back to 2016 in particular, no one would be caught dead saying anything positive about Trump out here. He was the lone exception. He's gay, he's married, he has 2 children, he's a devout Christian, and he's Republican. So there's a lot of kind of contradictions inherent in just those facts I just laid out, at least with the traditional Republican Party. But again, he was, I would say, first out of the gate out here and years ago with his support for Donald Trump. And as you allude to, now he's got a lot more company.
And actually, he's had an interesting impact on especially Donald Trump's current campaign, because Peter Thiel was an early backer of J.D. Vance on the national stage.
That's right. So J.D. Vance, a lot of people will know the broad contours of his story, but he came from Middletown, Ohio, very rough upbringing, which he wrote about in his book, Hillbilly Elegy. But he ended up getting accepted to Yale Law School, and he found himself a little bit fish out of water. He was from this very tough working class upbringing, a lot of deprivation. And he got to this place where there was a lot of kids who were, born with silver spoons in their mouths or were headed off to Wall Street or some other thing. And when he was a student there, Peter Thiel came to give a talk. And the message of the talk effectively was, you're all wasting your time. You're all going to be chasing the same dollar, the same status, the same thing that everybody else is telling you to chase. And that is a waste of your brilliant minds. You should do something more useful, more thoughtful, more impactful with your time. And J.D. Vance has since said that was one of the kind of pivotal moments of his life that really spoke to him. And so when he graduated law school, he got a job working for Peter Thiel's venture capital firm. Then he ventured out on his own. Peter Thiel backed him. And then, of course, when he ran for the Senate in Ohio, his campaign was really struggling. He was in his late 30s. He was behind in the polls. Nobody really knew much about him. And Peter Thiel donated $15 million to his campaign, which was a record for the state, for a state Senate seat. And that completely transformed the campaign and sent him to victory, put him in the Senate. And then, of course, a year and a half later, he is now at the elbow of Donald Trump.
So you've got someone like Peter Thiel providing people like J.D. Vance, essentially, to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You've got Elon Musk, who's there with some publicity, his public backing, and maybe a lot of cash as well. Who else is there in Silicon Valley land who is Team Trump?
A couple other very prominent people are Chamath Palihapitiya. He was a very early executive at Facebook. He made a ton of money, and then he launched his own investment firm. He owned sports teams. He's done very well. And as well as David Sachs, who is part of the PayPal mafia, along with Elon Musk. He is a billionaire investor. And not long before J.D. Vance was officially announced as Trump's running mate, they were all at a $300,000 a plate dinner at David Sachs's house, a fundraising dinner for Trump. J.D. Vance was there, and Chamath Palihapitiya was there, David Sachs was there, and a smattering of other very well-to-do Trump supporters. And again, if you go back to 2016, that kind of thing out here just would not have happened. Mm-hmm. But it has become fashionable amongst a certain set of particularly very wealthy and successful business folks out here to choose Trump this time around, including another couple other people were Marc and Ben Horowitz, who run one of the biggest venture capital firms out here. They're both billionaires. And they went on a podcast, their own podcast, and spent an hour and a half explaining why they chose Donald Trump this time around.
And is part of this because they think they are backing a winner, especially if lots of people were moving in the Donald Trump direction when the opponent looked like it was going to be Joe Biden and things looked a bit more like it could be a Trump win. Obviously, things are a bit more uncertain now with Kamala Harris.
Yes, so I think there's a few elements here. One is that Biden looked like a sure loser for a lot of people. And so backing him seemed like a kind of just a bad idea, not money well spent. At the same time, folks like Andreessen and Horowitz and David Sachs, they have an interest in light touch regulation, in the government not coming down hard on the industries they care about. Particularly in Andreessen and Horowitz's case, they are one of the biggest investors in crypto, for example, going back to where we started. And they've been spending a lot of time in DC trying to help and almost write the regulation for this industry that they're making a huge bet on. And of course, they see Trump more amenable to that. So it's a combination of out here, the tech industry, it's about picking winners or creating winners. And that's what they're trying to do here. And then that kind of overlays quite nicely with just that naked self-interest of these companies, these individuals. They now have a lot to lose. They are the establishment. In Trump, they see someone with whom they can do business.
And should we add this caveat to it, that what we're talking about here is the thin layer of very wealthy cream at the top of Silicon Valley? Is it fair to say that if you were to do a traditional opinion poll of people who lived in Silicon Valley, it still remains classically Californian Democrat?
Absolutely. I think there's been a little bit of a mischaracterization, certainly from outside looking in, that all of a sudden Silicon Valley, it loves Donald Trump. That's not the case. There is a group of extremely powerful, very wealthy people who have thrown their lot in with him, which itself is really interesting and a big departure from the past. That said, your typical man in the street, so to speak, your typical tech worker up and down the stack, they're still mostly Democrat. This is still California. So we haven't completely gone through a revolution in that sense.
But does that matter when you've managed to win over to your side the big players with deep pockets? Do you think, finally, Danny, that actually what we've just been discussing actually will have much of an impact on whether Donald Trump returns to the White House?
That is what is so fascinating. For all of the support that Trump has improbably gained here, there's still a lot of very powerful people who have now thrown their lot in with Kamala Harris, including folks like Reid Hoffman, who is another member of the PayPal mafia. He has very prominently backed Kamala Harris. So has Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, Sheryl Sandberg, formerly of Facebook. So she has her own kind of roster of billionaires as well. But what is really interesting is if you step back and look at this election cycle, so presidential down to state, federal, local level, the estimate is that in total, all these campaigns together will cost something like $30 billion in terms of lobbying, money being thrown around on candidates, on political machines, et cetera.
Gosh.
There's a lot of $5, $10, $20 donations from rank and file people. But, if you have the richest man on the planet, i.e. Elon Musk, in your corner, giving you tens of millions or hundreds of millions over the course of a campaign, that is potentially a difference maker. And that's what we're going to see come November 5th.
Which is billionaire on billionaire. I'm pretty sure that's how the world ends. I'm not sure if we should be worried or not. Danny Fortson, US West Coast correspondent for the Sunday Times since the beginning of 2012, and he's covered all things technology and Silicon Valley in his time. If you've enjoyed this conversation, you will love reading his recent-ish interview with Mike Lynch, the British tech entrepreneur, who of course died a few weeks ago when his super yacht sank in Italy. You can read that at thetimes.com with a subscription. We also spoke to Danny a bit more about the political transformation of Elon Musk in a previous episode. We'll pop a link to that in the description of this episode. The producer today was Priyanka Deladia. The executive producer is Kate Ford. And sound design and theme tune is by Mal Assetto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.